Hi, my name's Prudence Walker and I'm the Chief Executive of the Disabled Persons Assembly of New Zealand. So when we talk about access needs, it really covers a wide range of things. Often people think about perhaps some of the more obvious stuff around physical access, but access needs go far wider than that. It transfers to things like there's not too much noise in environments, things aren't too shiny for people with vision impairment, getting information in formats that are accessible to you, things like Braille and audio and captioning and New Zealand Sign Language systems need to be generally accessible for us. So perhaps if we're thinking about healthcare or education or transport or any sort of service really, we've got to be able to interact with that service as easily as the rest of the population. There's a lot of barriers that get in the way of us just living our lives. I think the biggest thing is that disabled people need to be involved in everything, because if you don't have disabled people involved, then you're not going to have systems that work for disabled people. You're not going to have things designed so that they are accessible if you don't have people who are bringing that knowledge into that work with them. And so be that people who are designing buildings or parks, disabled people need to be involved in all of that. I think of, all the things that are engineered, and they are things that make a real difference. Me being able to get down the street in my mobility scooter and, one, not fall out of it, two, have curb cuts that are actually kind to me and not have to worry about or add load to what I'm having to manage and think about.
So one of the major projects I'm working on at the moment is about disabled people's experiences of transport in New Zealand. So it came about from Waka Kotahi, recognising that there are a lot of gaps in our understanding of how disabled people experience transport, the fact that their travel patterns are different from those of other people, and therefore what we might be able to do about that as transport planners and to invest in the system. So we, Emma Cagney, partnered with the Disabled Persons Assembly to bid for that work, and we're successful. So it's really exciting because we have disabled people as experts and paid peers alongside us, running the research, interpreting it, analysing it, and therefore making recommendations about what it says and what it means for the transport system in New Zealand as a whole, really. I think it's important because we're designing as engineers and transport professionals for the ultimate future that we want to have for the country, for everyone in the country. So we're not just designing for one particular kind of person or a transport mode even, but to involve disabled people means that we're going to get the broadest range of experiences and insights into things we might not have even considered as part of our design, because our standards don't always cover everything, they're not always best practice, and they always get traded off against other constraints. So involving people in considering universal access and universal design from the project's very conception means that we're most likely to get an outcome that is just best value for money, because it's going to be usable for the most people for the longest time. I think sometimes we can be a bit reluctant to engage with a group that we don't understand as well as we want to, but disabled people really appreciate being welcomed and invited to participate in projects. So finding local champions for the disability sector and working with them is probably the first thing to do. The second thing to do is there are some principles of design that we have worked out for transport, for example, that work really well, and that is safe and obvious and step-free routes and access to places. They highlight issues that we might not have thought were really important but actually are. For example, obvious wayfinding can help a whole lot of people, from migrants who don't understand English, for example, children, people who are autistic or have some brain injury or can't interpret the language of transport and the built environment. If we make our environments as intuitive and obvious as possible while keeping them safe and step-free, then we're going to cater to the widest range of people, I think.
Parakiori is the new name for Metro Sport, and it'll be the biggest facility of its kind in New Zealand. This building is huge. The Aquatic Sensory Experience Pool is a special purpose room, about 140 square metres, that is set aside for people to be able to experience water and water-related activities. Absolutely integrated, and council and community users were involved in the design development because they were our touch point of people who had direct experience and very useful ideas. It's got a whole lot of interactive facilities in it. So the idea is sort of cause and effect. You press a button and you'll get a tower of bubbles coming up from the floor, or you might get a fountain or a jet from the side, or lights in the pool. There's also a whole lot of tactile experience around the pool. The facility can be tuned and controlled to the individual user's needs and experience. All the access throughout the building is all on one level or near one level, so that anyone can access any part of the building. That requires conception of the design from a fundamental perspective. You know, the way in which the building is configured, the floor levels around the building relative to the pools, how that works relative to ground conditions, how you approach the building from the outside. That all has to be integrated into the whole engineering of the project. You can't just go and bolt it on at the end and say, there, I've ticked that box. You have to conceive of the facility in a way that there is no barrier. Now, if you're designing for these features, accessibility and access for all, it has to be an integrated part of the way the project's put together. So if you go and have a look at the Earthquake Memorial, for example, the access there isn't defined as being able-bodied or disabled access. It's just the access. And you don't walk up to it seeing, oh, that's the route for disabled people and this is the route for able-bodied people. You see it as being uniform.